Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the editorial director at Worn and Wound. Really happy to be joined today by my colleague, Kat Shoulders, media director at Worn and Wound. Kat, how's it going?
Great, Zach.
Great to have you.
It's weird calling you Zach because I'm so used to calling you Kazan. That was really weird for me.
Yeah, that was weird. I don't know.
Did that sound weird?
Threw me off immediately. Don't do that again, Kat. I mean,
okay,
we're used to a certain cadence here. Yeah, it's fine. Also happy to be joined today by a guest. We have Georgia Benjamin on the podcast for the very first time. Georgia, welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and to chat with the both of you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. It's long overdue. You've been doing a lot of really interesting things in the watch industry for a while, but I think in particular lately, I think your Instagram presence is really taken off, and there's a lot of interesting things happening kind of in the broader scope of women's watches and women in watches. And I think it's a really good time to have you on the podcast to talk about all those things. So that is what we will be doing today. Before we get into that, of course, we always do a wrist check on the Worn and Wound podcast. Georgia, you're the guest. What are you wearing today? Kick us off.
I'm wearing my 18038 with a gorgeous little black dial and gem set markers. And this was one of the first watches that got me into collecting, which I know is an outrageous first piece, but it's honestly one of my favorites. And I thought I could wear it for the two of you today.
That's beautiful. Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah, I love that one.
Kat, how about you? What do you got?
I have my Rolex GMT Master 2 on today, so rocking the red, white, and blue colorway.
Excellent. Yeah, we're recording this just a few days after the 4th of July, 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America. So we're still in a patriotic mood. I am not wearing a Rolex. I'm wearing my Fierce Brunswick Aurora today. UK based brand with a mother of pearl dial. That's what I grabbed today. It's still warm here in New Hampshire. It's thin, easy to wear watch. So I thought it'd be a good one to wear.
I love that dial. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, Georgia. I want to make sure that our audience is properly introduced to you and what you do in the watch space. You can tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in watches, discovered watches as a hobby, and what what you're up to in the watch world these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I feel very lucky to have fallen into watches sort of when I turned 30. I've really only been collecting for about 5 years now. And I've always loved these vintage jewelry and these objects that have stories. And when I discovered watches, I realized that you can kind of learn forever in this space. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with it. And like I mentioned before, this President Day date, which again is timely to celebrate America's birthday, was the first piece that I had my eye on. I don't come from a watch family. I don't come from a watch background. And I said, I'm going to buy myself a gold Rolex for my 30th. And this was what started it all. I started researching and I started learning as much as I could for about a year and a half until I felt firstly comfortable enough to spend this much money, but also confident in what I was actually buying. And I started just very organically posting on Instagram with what I was learning because I didn't find that many other women sort of telling the story, telling the history of these pieces in a way that resonated with me. And I'm very, very lucky that in the last 2 or 3 years, it's just kind of taken off. I think I approach with such a sort of a joyful approach when it comes to learning and when it comes to sort of sharing these stories. And it's been really lucky to resonate with a lot of people. So when it comes to what I do in this space, it's sharing these tales, it's working with brands to do various different activations and community events to really bring more people into it and ultimately lower the barrier to entry into watches. I think people still feel it's so prohibitive, but it doesn't need to be. You can have a $200 fun vintage piece. You can have a $200,000 crazy vintage piece. Doesn't matter. We're all just so enthusiastic about this space. And it's so nice to meet like-minded people, regardless of what you're wearing on your wrist. So it's a fantastic community that I found myself in and get to meet wonderful people like you guys too. So I feel really grateful.
Yeah, something that I see often on a lot of your Instagram videos and posts is there are so many women that are kind of seeking validation from other women, can I wear the medium Cartier Santos? Am I allowed? This isn't the small, or this is, or vice versa. And, I think what you're doing is important because there is so much doubt, especially from, I think, the mass public, people that aren't in the watch, community as a whole. And they're just going by what they see in advertising, right? And
Yeah.
that's all they know. So, no, I think what you're doing is great. You're spreading the good word. Buy what you like, buy what you want to wear.
Exactly. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
What was it about the Rolex specifically that drew you in, Georgia? And was it kind of like, what was the process like for you to discover like sort of like the watch world beyond Rolex? Because I think that that's sort of like
Yeah.
it's such a household name. It's sort of like what people imagine when they close their eyes and they picture a watch. And like you do such a nice job of sort of like broadening the scope of the watch industry, like well beyond sort of like the large brands that we normally consider, and some more like esoteric watches. Like, how did you personally sort of like discover that and find like these little niches like in the hobby?
So I think it was in my learning journey when buying this first piece. So again, I didn't really have much information or much knowledge before entering the space. And Rolex was the mecca. I think a lot of people who don't have much knowledge in the watch space too, they're just like, they see Rolex as the pinnacle. So that's what I was targeting. That's sort of what I thought I should buy as my piece to reward myself for turning this milestone birthday. But it was that learning journey that really opened up the world of design in watches for me. And then I realized that, wow, 70s has such an identity across all brands, across fun vintage little pieces, and even in novelty pieces. I think I learned that there's so much in the design that goes into watches, which obviously pertains to my day job as well, that made me fall in love with it even more. So I think it was that entrance through Rolex that sort of started my learning journey. But after that, it was the design stories in watches that made me fall in love. And I have all sorts of silly pieces, from like Lego watches from 1997 to like silly little novelty Pokemon watch that I bought the other day, like all sorts of things that kind of spark joy for me, but also have an interesting design story. And I think that's the niche that I've fallen in love with when it comes to watches versus movements or versus sort of complications. It's the design narrative that goes into each piece. Like when you mentioned Fears have an incredible history dating back to almost as old as America, but they've resurrected more so recently, and the techniques that they use in their dial from a design perspective are so special. And that's what definitely gets me so excited.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of interesting things. You mentioned your day job at Adobe. Tell us a little bit about what you do there and how it kind of like informs and relates to how you view watches and what you ultimately do in the watch space.
No, so I'm a design leader at Adobe, and I've always worked in design sort of my whole career. Started more so in fashion and in sort of marketing, e-com design. And for the last 10 plus years, I've been in sort of interactive UX design. And right now at Adobe, I build out products. So it's very nerdy, it's very niche. It's sort of on the technical side of things, which very much correlates to like the technical side of watches too. How can we have these very, very tiny details that are pushed by a millimeter or a tenth of a millimeter or even 2 pixels if I'm creating an interactive product? So they correlate a lot with these tiny little things that can make such a huge difference. And Adobe is like an absolute dream to work for. They are like the design platform for all designers across the world. And I know that there's a huge rise in AI, and I'm actually building out a lot of the AI tools at Adobe too, which is incredible to be sort of at that forefront. But they do overlap a lot. And something that I love about my day job is we have a thriving watch community, and it's so fun to be able to chat on Slack with all of my watch friends at work about all of my things I do outside of work too. So it's a lovely harmony between the two.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've seen where Google has done a lot of, limited editions within their group. Has Adobe done something similar?
So we are in the process of designing one, right?
Okay.
Oh, cool.
I'm so excited about.
That's cool.
I felt I can tease it, obviously. With our wonderful friends. It's obviously going to be exclusive just to Adobe. Like no one outside is going to be able to buy it. But we're designing with Studio Underdog, and I'm so excited.
Cool.
Obviously, their team is so fun, and getting to design with Rich and everyone there is really great. And I think something that I'm enjoying doing in this process is uncovering a lot of Easter eggs. Like what we're trying to do is incorporate if you know Adobe things into the watch design itself. So it's a super creative process and something that is just so exciting. I have a call with them in a couple of weeks to sort of go through designs and see how we're getting on. But it's going to be so exciting. So
that's a great brand to collab with. I couldn't honestly think of someone better for creators, to work with, because I'm sure he's giving you full reign.
Which is it's so exciting.
Go nuts and go crazy.
yeah, think of the colors, think of everything we can do. I know I'm desperate
Yeah.
to visit the doghouse next time I'm back.
Yeah.
But I think what Rich does with this whole team is he's such a visionary. And it's so incredible that, again, the joy and the silliness that he brings to like real technical watchmaking. So it's a lovely combination of the two.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's so creative. Kat, what do you think it's like to have a Slack where there's like a side conversation about watches, and it's not like the whole conversation? We should start like a.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of sometimes I wonder. Like I've heard of these, like the little like watch communities that pop up at like non-watch companies. That's something I'm not likely to experience. I guess. Like
I
we
guess
have.
we won't ever. We talk about watches all day.
You just sparked an incredible idea. You guys you should come and do a talk for our watch community. I would love you to come in and do that.
Yeah.
And you can do it remotely like this, and we can just have a little half an hour session with my
That would be great.
and they would be so excited.
I would love to, as an Adobe user very heavily every day, I would love to to chat with you guys.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, we have our VP of design who's been there for like 17 years. He's one of the biggest enthusiasts, and he has like a million different pieces. So we have a whole mixture of people there, but would love you to invite you on at some point to come and share.
There's an interesting angle there. There's a lot of tools that Adobe has incorporated over the last, I would say 3 years heavily, that has made watch editing on Photoshop, on RAW, Bridge, etc., so much easier for me. So yeah, there's a lot that we could chat about.
Amazing. This is
That'd
great.
be really fun. So Georgia, you mentioned this is like a relatively new pursuit for you. You 5 years in, your Instagram account, is it Georgia Benji or Georgia Benj? What's your preferred?
Yeah,
Georgia Benj. Okay,
yeah,
gotcha. Okay, I always wonder, like, what's the preferred pronunciation of this?
I go by a lot of nicknames, so whatever you prefer. Yeah.
I learned on you're recently on the Collectability podcast with your friend Courtney, and I believe she mentioned that your Instagram account is like you're the most followed female watch influencer like on social media, which is just like wild to me after 5 years. So it's been kind of like a meteoric rise, actually like a similar trajectory to Richard at Studio Underdog. There's like some common thread there. What do you attribute that to, and what has it been like, kind of like building this Instagram presence, the social media presence over the last 5 years? It's been a pretty interesting time period for the watch industry with a lot of changes. I'm curious what your perspective on that is like.
Definitely so. Well, thank you for calling me out. And this last year especially, I've just seen so much growth, which I feel so grateful for. I've been a lot more consistent with what I've been posting. I've done a lot more storytelling, and I'm really trying to see what resonates with my audience the most and sort of put more content out for them. I'm very lucky to have a 70% female viewership, which is kind of crazy in the watch space. Most people are like 95% men, but I have 70% women across like major cities across the world, which I'm so grateful that is who I'm tapping into. So I think this year especially, I've just tried to lean in more and do more. And yes, I have a very demanding day job where I run a team and whatnot, and then I do this in all my spare time. But I am able to balance the two for now. Maybe that will change in the future. But I believe that the spend of like the female spend power is kind of increasing, as well as the way that we want to express ourselves. So women are so comfortable, not all women obviously, are so comfortable spending thousands of dollars on jewelry. Like they don't even think about it, especially in major cities like New York or London or Paris. Sure, I'm going to go and buy myself a new tennis bracelet, whatever it is. But people won't do that with watches, even if it's a $500 watch. So I think that is what's changing this year. I think people are trying to find jewelry to really express themselves and really show that off as like, this is a part of me. This is something that I've achieved, something that I've bought that I'm going to wear every day. And that's just becoming more of a constant conversation in popular culture. So that, coupled with me just leaning in and putting out as much content as possible, I think has grown to like a huge amount of growth. And I think my page has like average 5 million views a month, which is just like insane.
Yeah, it is insane.
It's wild. So I feel so grateful. And yes, I work hard at it, but it's still, I feel really lucky and really grateful.
Well, I think you've broke the barrier that a lot of people have a hard time with. And before I came on to Warning Wow, I had a podcast with Catlin at 10 and 2, and our demographic totally different. We had less than 5% women. We were just stuck in the watch community. We could not break that. And what you've done is you have broken through that, which is huge. And that is like a huge marker of success. And I think that's, like, the only way to move forward is, like, you have to reach the general public. You can't just stay in, like, our little watch bubble forever. As fun as it is, and I love everybody that listens to this podcast and reads our blog, but it's like you do have to grow, and you wanna educate people, and you wanna get people more involved, and it's incredible to hear that you have a 70% female audience. That is really, really awesome, and shoot, I was gonna say something else about one of the watches you mentioned, I forgot. It'll come back to me here in a second. Mm.
I do think your comment though regarding like the watch community content versus sort of broader luxury jewelry space, it's very hard to tackle both simultaneously
Yeah.
because like the watch community want you to get really nitty gritty on details and want you to go sort of very granular into movements and the technical elements in the watches, but then like the general population don't want to see that. So
Right.
it's difficult to find that balance of sort of proving my validity within the watch space, but also appealing to the masses. So that's something that I do struggle with quite frequently because I know that when I do more sort of technical niche content, it performs well from a engagement standpoint, but it doesn't hit, it hits maybe like 10,000 people versus
Mhm.
100,000 people. So I'm trying to see what actually has higher retention, what's going to make people coming back, what's actually got better follow rates, and really diving into the analytics to see sort of what content actually performs well and how I can grow and how I can sort of tap into the audience better. So it's a very analytical game.
Absolutely.
What are you finding? I'm just curious, like what in your kind of like initial round, or I don't know how initial is, maybe you've been doing this for a while, but like what is the content that like people keep coming back to that you're making?
So I can tell you what doesn't actually do well, which is going to be very contradictory. When things go viral and hit over 1 million, that is
Mhm.
not good, which sounds crazy, but the follow rate on that and the actual engagement rate on that is sure. You get shares, you get 1 million views. I've had a bunch that's done this, but no one knows it's me. No one comes to follow for my character or my information. They see a crazy piece that's performed really well. Amazing, but there's no retention there. People aren't going to come back. And when I start talking, they're going to be like, who is this? I followed her because of her watch. Like, I don't want to see her. So,
Okay.
yes, it's
Yeah.
amazing when something hits 1 million, but at the same time, it doesn't actually do that well. The ones that I found that have done really well recently are guides. So it's like, these are vintage Cartier that you can buy. Here's 5 pieces that you can buy under $500. It's really sharing that information so people can learn from my content, and they take hours to put together, but people are so engaged. I get DMs, I get messages, I can send her like affiliate links, all sorts. So those to me is what really, really works. And it's what I can build my audience with.
Yeah, that rings true. I think Kat, I think you'll probably agree that kind of corresponds to what we see and what
Yeah.
works and what doesn't work across all of our channels. People, there's so much out there. You
Mm.
have to distinguish yourself with something of value. So it makes sense that like
Mhm.
a guide that has like real information on whatever sort of like watch you're, discussing, or type of watch you're discussing, like that's, it's evergreen content that's going to be valuable to people, over the long haul, rather than, like the viral watch of the moment that, it works algorithmically, but isn't necessarily something that's going to be interesting next week or a month from now.
Yeah. But then there has to be a combination of the evergreen and the viral.
Yeah.
Like it has to
Yeah.
be what can you do timely, immediately, even if it's lower quality content you can just push out. But then what's also going to be evergreen that's going to stay on your page and people are going to know you for. So you've got to do all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you finding, women specifically are asking for in your comment section for the most?
They want the confidence in what they're buying. So that's not necessarily, it's hard to put content out specifically for that, but they come to
Mhm.
me as a trusted source of how do we know where to buy from? How do we know something is real? Do I need
Yeah.
boxing papers? All of these questions that people that like we know you
Mhm.
know, papers, but like a lot of people who are new buyers, like actually do believe they need things like this. They have to buy this high quality. Oh, they want to buy the cheapest. They like a lot of things. They're just sort of ill informed because they just don't know and they don't know who to ask. So that's my largest amount of DMs. It's like trusted sources, questions that like we're familiar with that perhaps aren't surfaced as much. So I do want to do more guides about like this is what you need to do when you're looking for your first watch. Like this
Yeah.
is you're buying the seller, not the watch itself. Never buy the cheapest watches out there because there's probably something wrong with it. Like what
Mhm.
surfacing actually means, things that are like kind of boring, but also so important. So I think making more content around that to just really better educate people around watch buying is going to be really crucial.
No, I totally agree, and I think Kazan, you can speak of this too, 'cause we both buy and sell a lot of watches.
Too
The
many.
market's too many. The market is always changing, and I'll be honest, I've been buying and selling watches for the last 8 years, And a few months ago, I very, very nearly got scammed, and it wasn't something that was very obvious, but because of AI now and tools and photographs, it was very, very hard to distinguish something, and it was something incredibly minor that stood out that made me go, "Hmm, question
Mhm.
mark," sent it to someone else I knew, and they were like, "I think that's a scammer," and I backed out immediately, and I think it ended up being someone that was trying to scam people, but it's getting harder and harder to tell. And this is as, someone that has done this hundreds of times, you know? So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, the more content that you can put out, it's not irrelevant. It's never going to be irrelevant because it changes year to year, you know?
I think of myself as a pretty seasoned, person in the watch world. Certainly, I've been hanging around like the classified sections of like
Yeah.
every watch forum and Reddit for
Yeah.
a long time. And I put a watch for sale on Reddit Watch Exchange maybe like, I don't know, a month or so ago. And when you do that, you immediately get like DMs from like the moderators, like warning you about like all the like recent scams, which is helpful but also shocking and, kind of like humbling to realize like, oh, there's like all these like new ways I can get ripped off. And like within a day or two, I had like several, like fake inquiries from like would be scammers. So like that
Yeah.
sort of thing, Georgia, like, to your point, is going to be helpful to anyone for all time, and there's always ways that you can sort of like, you gotta keep your guard up always just because it's
Hmm.
like it's a constant you're under constant threat, sometimes in
Yeah.
the watch
Yeah.
world. So
Truly. I know it
yeah.
shouldn't be a dangerous space, but clearly it is in some regard.
Yeah, no, it really can be. George, I wanted to ask you about like this perception that I have, and tell me if it's like just a perception or if I'm, looking at this in the, from, the incorrect angle. But it seems like there has been like an influx of women across like the collecting sphere and also like visible in like the retail and media spaces. And I'm wondering from your perspective if this is like if this is this a new thing? Are there actually like more women across like all sectors of the watch world now, or are we just kind of like seeing it more because of the way like social media algorithms are working? Obviously there have been, women in watch media for decades, and I don't want to short shrift, like the Barbara Palumbos and Roberta Nasses of the world.
Hmm.
And Kat, you had a very successful podcast, in an earlier, you're still a successful podcaster in the watch space. But I'm curious, Georgia, what you make of sort of like the increased visibility of women in watches and sort of like what that means, if anything.
Yeah, I think your point earlier about that women have always been there and we've
Yeah.
always been like leading in this space in many ways with incredible voices. And something that I learned earlier at Watches and Wonders this year, Coralie Shariol told me about this,
Hmm.
that 45% of the watch industry itself are women, which is a huge
Yeah.
amount. And
Wow. Yeah.
hearing that alone was like, why are these stories not celebrated more? Like, do people just not want to hear it? Like, this is wild. But if you really think about it, you look at PR teams, you look at marketing teams, you actually go to the manufacturers, you see these women working on these incredible, delicate pieces that maybe the men can't even do. Like you go and see the gem setters, and again, it's full of women doing these incredible. And you look at some of these métier d'art pieces, again, women are doing all of these. So why
Yeah.
are their stories not being told? And I don't want to have a platform that's just dedicated to women. I want to be inclusive
Hmm.
to everyone. But at the same time, these stories need to be like shouted from the rooftop because almost half the industry is comprised of women. But to your point of it being sort of more visible from a media lens, I think like Dimepiece forged the way for so many of us to start
Hmm.
having this platform and having this conversation online. And we're so grateful for her for doing that and sort of forging this path. And especially on social media more specifically, but I think that people, especially buyers, want to see women talk about watches, want to see it from their lens, want to see it from their sort of design critique versus a guy coming in and saying, if this is a lady's watch, like it doesn't matter if it's a lady's watch or a men's
Hmm.
watch, the watch doesn't care. So they want women to be talking about watches that's going to resonate with them. So I think there's just been more comfortability with that. And I think it's also men are more comfortable buying things from watches, from buying watches from women, not women from watches. That is the wrong way to do it. But I think it just has been more of a rise of women in the space that have increased confidence in that area as well. So I hope it just continues. I hope more and more women get into the space and more and more women tell their stories. And I hope there's just a continued celebration of women in watchmaking more broadly.
Yeah. I mean, whatever the reason for the increased visibility, I think like I'm grateful for it. Like as a, it's kind of like the stereotypical, like, early 40s white male, in watches, like there's enough of us, and our stories have been told. And I'm like, I want to, like, always interested in like other perspectives. And I think that like
Yeah.
that is, thankfully something that other people in my position are welcoming at this point. It's just like, it makes for a healthier community when you have
Definitely.
like, you know, different voices, speaking to these things. It lifts
Yeah.
everybody up, I think.
No,
True. I
definitely. I
think
think it's just been a snowball. Sorry, Kat, go on. Yeah.
well, I was just gonna quickly mention, to your point, Georgia, I think marketing is still not there yet, and it's got a long way to go, I think, still, and we see all these advertisements, we see all these stories told through the brand's lenses, and still men, and still targeted towards men, and the women's pieces are still thought of, in my opinion, as an afterthought. There's a few brands doing it right, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of them here shortly, but I do think, and it's something that we've trialed and errored here at Worn and Wound with storytelling, and when we shoot on a woman versus a man, doesn't get as much likes, doesn't get as many views on Instagram, doesn't get as many comments, but then you you post the wrist shot of the dude wearing it, and it's like, it takes off, and it's so frustrating, right? And I think, Kazan, you've done a great job. We have so many incredible female writers that we've brought on board over the last few years that, I've loved working here because of that. But yeah, I do think the watch world in general, outside of the community, like the companies and the brands themselves, there's a long way to go in terms of marketing for women out there, I think. But I'm curious your thought, Georgia, on that too.
I think I think you're exactly right with that. So whereas the community is more welcoming to women and want to celebrate women's voices, I think traditional media is not there. And
Yeah,
you look at all the watch brands putting their marketing campaigns out, they're still attracting boomers. They're still going for very, very traditional watch ads. And they're putting it out in a way that does not resonate with the late 20 to early 40-year-old female buyer
absolutely. Yeah.
specifically. Like, how can watch brands put together alternate marketing campaigns that actually tap into these buyers that have a huge amount of spend? Like, women have a huge disposable income. People in their 30s who are like unmarried, don't have children, they're going to go and buy themselves treats. I buy myself a lot of treats. I don't have babies. My watches are my babies. So it's wild that watch brands aren't tapping into this. And I've chatted with a bunch of watch brands and I feel very lucky to have these relationships with them. But I'm like, let's work on our campaign together. Let's work on some
Hmm.
alternate marketing strategies. Let's do some hyper targeted direct marketing, whether it's through Instagram, whether it's through Google ads, whether it's through all sorts of different media touch points to actually tap into this audience. It doesn't need to replace your traditional watch ads
No.
because I don't think
Yeah.
that's going to go
Yeah.
anywhere. But what can you do simultaneously? Throw a couple grand at a different space and see who you're tapping into.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're willing to take that risk or that experimentation yet, which
No.
Yeah.
is wild to me.
Well,
Like,
I think a big problem is like they're still thinking about watches with this division, this line down the middle of men's and women's pieces rather than just a product. And when you see an advertisement on TV for an Apple iPhone or the Apple headphones, right? You might see a commercial with a woman in it, you might see one with a man. I never think, oh, I like it's just a product. It's a product for everyone. And I think that needs to come over to the watch industry. I'm sure advertisements that you do for Adobe, they're not like this ad is going to be for our women audience and this one's going to be, and when you see these advertisements and these marketing campaigns with the watch brands, it's we're going to shoot on a man, he's going to be our hero story. Maybe we'll feature it on a women. Maybe we'll include a couple pics. Maybe. Most of the time, not even. But again, it's like this afterthought of like, we'll get some shots for a woman's wrist. Again, there's a few brands that aren't doing that. But for the majority of them, I still feel like the Swiss industry is 25 years behind,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Georgia, your point about it, the boomer focused marketing is really spot on. And it really feels like it's as much a problem of, you know, of misgendering, watches as it is a generational problem. It feels like this industry is always just a little bit behind. And it wasn't that long ago where it was like unheard of and like transgressive to even sell a watch online if you were a big Swiss brand. The most brands have like kind of gotten on board and like they
Mhm,
understand that like that's important. But it took a long time for the Swiss watch industry to catch up with the rest of the internet,
mhm,
in a meaningful way. And another thing that you guys talked about on the collectability podcast is this like wealth transfer that's happening from the boomers to their Gen X and millennial offspring. And I wonder if we'll see
mhm.
similar changes in how like the watch industry is structured along with how these younger generations are actually like buying watches and consuming watches and talking about watches.
Mhm. But it's I think, Kat, to your point as well on all of this actually is the problem the marketing? Is the problem the product development? Is the problem just the Swiss industry in general? Like, we love the Swiss industry. We wouldn't be here unless it was around. But at the same time, is it the fact that watches are still marketed towards men or women because they are
Mhm.
designed differently, even though the watch, again, doesn't care? But what level do we want to tackle? I think some brands, I think I've written about this before in an article, but some brands are removing the gender from their pieces. They're just
Mhm.
like Cartier, for example. They just have
Mhm.
mini to
Yeah.
extra large, and extra large is a dinner plate. So that's a whole other thing that we could tackle. But they're doing a good job of not having ladies
Yeah.
and men's listed. And
Yeah.
a lot of brands still have that. So is it
Mhm.
the watch design itself? Is it the way that the brands are actually marketing them on online platforms, or how they're sort of doing it in the descriptor itself? I think you look at Swatch, for example. Swatch have incredible PDP images where they're shooting it on men's wrists, on women's wrists, on all sorts of wrists to really be like, I could see myself in that piece regardless of the gender. And they don't talk about it from that lens. They talk about it based on size alone. And I think watches should be described around size. You see Timothy Chalamet wearing a mini Cartier Panthère. You see him also wearing a Urban Jurgensen. Like, he wears
Mhm.
all sorts. Like, women should be able
Mhm.
to wear all sorts too, and we are allowed. But it's
Yeah.
just not shown, and we don't have that example visibly in the media
Mhm.
enough to inspire us to wear more. So it's frustrating from a female lens because I want to see other women like me wearing all sorts of pieces so that I'm not like, oh, startled by it. I'm more like, oh no, I'm seeing a ton of people wearing a 42. I can do that too.
Mhm.
That's what I
Yeah.
want to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Georgia, you wrote a piece for Watch Pro on this very topic, this idea of kind of like degendering watches. So, we've been sort of like like dancing around it a little bit, but like, where do you see this sort of like fluidity and sizing and style and marketing like going? Are we like, it feels like we're trending in the right direction and sort of like looking at watches, without a gender. Of course, watches don't have a gender. A watch is a watch, as you point out. Like the watch doesn't know who's wearing it. Like, what do we like? What's the next step in this? Like, what do we need to do? Like, what do we need to do next to
I think this is a
kind of like
sweeping.
shift the point of view of like
But
people
I think
here?
it has to come from this is a I love my vintage dealer friends. They're amazing.
Yeah.
I learned so much from them. But a lot of the problem starts with them because they say this is a men's watch, this is a with women's watch. And they've been
Hmm.
in the industry for probably 40 years and they've
Mm.
seen it. And that's how they started in the industry and that's sort of how it was separated. But people don't shop like that anymore. So we need that narrative to change from that perspective because I think when we first started this conversation, I said you buy from the dealer, you buy the seller, not the watch. But we're buying the seller who still talks about watches like men's and women's watches. So
Yep.
how can we encourage change in that capacity so that when we're talking about watches, when you go into a mom and pop shop, when you go into all sorts of these reputable secondhand dealers, they're talking about it from a size perspective versus a gender perspective. And that's, I think, a huge one. And if we can change it from there, maybe it can still trickle down. So it's hard to determine like at what point should we really start changing the gender narrative on these. But I do think a lot of people are flocking towards vintage because of the accessibility, especially at sort of the lower end pieces. But we don't need to talk about them as gender. They are just
Mhm.
size, and it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. I wonder if we look to the car industry a lot because it's still very genderized there, but I think in some ways, if your grandfather hands down a, Porsche 911, you're not questioning, is this a man's car? Is this a one? You're taking the car. You're driving
Hmm.
that car. You're enjoying that car. So they've done something right in terms of storytelling over the years, because again, it's like a product. It's not gendered. At one point it was. At one point cars were gendered and they made
Yeah.
cars for women and they made cars mostly for men, mostly because women weren't driving. But I think, yeah, maybe that's an industry we could kind of look at and see what they've done right in terms of that. And yeah, I mean, if your grandmother hands you a watch and you're a guy and you want to wear it and you can pull it off, do it. Like,
Mhm.
I think that's awesome, and you've got a great story to tell.
I have an exact story from that from last weekend. I was in the Hamptons with Courtney of Tiny Wrist, and this guy was wearing this tiny, tiny Omega on a bracelet, vintage piece from the 50s. And I pointed at him. I said, "Come here, I need to see your watch." And he said, "My wife is going to go crazy because you love it, right?" And I said, "I love it. I'm so happy you're wearing this." And he said, "My grandma gave it to me. She didn't have any like grandsons. There's no one else she could pass it on to. And my wife makes so much of fun of me because it's a girl's watch." Why is it a girl's watch? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And he was like, I said, "I'm going to tag you on Instagram." He's like, "I don't have it. Tag my watch. My wife, she needs to see this whole thing." But he was so happy that I called him out and I celebrated him for wearing this incredible gold bracelet. And that has this story, has this heritage. And like you said, like if his grandma passed this down, it doesn't make a difference. It's still got that narrative and that story that we want to tell, that we want to sort of have that lineage and be a part of. And
Yeah.
if my grandpa passed me down a 911, oh my gosh, I would be so happy. That would be amazing. But I think
Yeah.
you're right. Cars don't genderize in the same way that watches do. And I do think because we don't have that variation in size and
Mhm,
skews when it comes to cars. Like we do. Like look at the
mhm.
911, those things have only released for 2 years or 1 year. Like we definitely have the variation, but
Yeah,
we don't have the size difference, which I think is fundamentally just comes down to still.
yeah.
Yeah. It's it's really interesting how like this like the question of size, like it works in multiple directions. Like Kat, you've for years talked about how your preference for larger sports watches that you would
Mhm,
normally kind of associate or refer to as a men's watch. You've had
mhm.
many, you know, 42 millimeter,
Yeah,
divers, on your wrist over the course of years. You long for an Omega Ploprof, which is a enormous
it's
watch,
giant. Yeah.
obviously. And then, like Georgia, like I love that story about the man you encountered wearing, the small vintage watch. And like that is one of the more interesting trends I've noticed. And like it still is a trend, but maybe it just becomes like the norm is, you have brands like I keep thinking about like Baltic, for example, making like smaller, sort of like cocktail inspired watches in like a true gender neutral
Yeah.
size with stone dials, you know, gem set
Mhm.
sometimes. Like these are watches that I think 5, 6 years ago would have been marketed strictly towards women. And now they are seeing, some acceptance like across a much broader, spectrum of watch enthusiasts, which I think is a really interesting thing that's happening.
But what I think is crazy is if we go back to the 50s, men's watches were a 32
Right.
and 34.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. And what what happened in the 90s, 2000s where people had to see watches from the other side of the room in order to validate that you're
Yeah.
wearing a watch? I feel like there's a shift in perhaps showmanship or status and that acceptance of like I can see you're wearing a 44 Panerai from across the room. This guy must be rich. This guy must have taste. This
Mhm.
life must have style. Whereas I don't think people want that anymore. I think the
Quiet
purchase,
luxury, yeah.
quiet luxury is such a thing. People don't want
Yeah.
to be like spotted from like sure there's definitely people who do want to be spotted across the room for the shiny RM that they're wearing, like that's a different story, but I think people are now wearing things for themselves and they want to have something that's going to show off their personal style and tell part of their story, and I think that showiness is just kind of going away, which is why watches are going back to perhaps a smaller size, or perhaps we are moving back to sort of a genderless approach, but there's still a long way to go, and I think we're only sort of scratching the surface at it right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure. I think that like it's everything's always changing. I think that that's like the fundamental like truth behind all this is that like as more people get into the hobby, as brands continue to experiment, like there will be like a natural sort of like shift in how we view these things. It does feel like we're heading in the right direction, a more kind of like accepting sort of like direction where people can just wear whatever whatever they want. I always think about like people, men, to be specific, who like see a smaller watch, say like a 35 or 36 millimeter watch, and their first reaction is, I need a 40 millimeter watch or a 41 millimeter watch. And I always think like, it's a good thing it's not 1955 because you would have been just shit out of luck. Like there wouldn't
Yeah.
have been a
Yeah.
watch for you, you know, like
Yeah.
for
Slap that
decades we
pocket
just
watch on your wrist. Yeah.
yeah, like it's just kind of silly how we like arrived at this. Everyone kind of like arrived at this decision that like, oh, if you're a man, you need to watch it's 40 millimeters or whatever. Like it just doesn't
Mhm.
really make a whole lot of logical sense.
No.
But the watch
Yeah.
industry moves slowly. Like, think
Yeah.
about like Watches and Wonders. They've been working on these pieces probably for years. And I know
Yeah.
they've
Hmm.
only just released it for us for the first time that year, but change is so slow in this industry. And yes, we're seeing trends happening and influence in popular culture making an impact on what watch companies are doing. But we're going to have to wait 5 years or so to see any real impact just because of the length of product development. Like, things don't
Absolutely.
happen overnight. So I think, like, even you look at Bulgari, who put that tiny automatic movement in their new Serpenti or the Serpenti last year or so,
Hmm.
like, incredible advances there. I love that they're doing that, but that's just one example. And I think, like, we can list off on one hand probably the brands that are doing this. So we're going to have to wait for years for this to like fully take effect and for
Yeah.
brands to perhaps become less genderized. But I do believe it's happening, and it's just going to happen
Yeah.
slower than we desire. Yeah.
Gotta have patience.
Yeah.
No, to your point, I can't remember the brand. I want to say maybe IWC, one of their releases this year, I think they said they were working on for 7 years. Like, that's a
Hmm.
long time, you know, and by the time you release it, you pray to God that people still want it, you know, at that point, you know, that are hungry for it. But yeah, it takes a while. And I think the public kind of forgets that too. You know, these things take years to make.
Yeah. Georgia, you mentioned Cartier as an example of a brand that's sort of like doing this right without, you know, gendering their watches. They, you know, obviously they tell you the size and they have like a range of, you know, shapes and sizes and they just sort of like present them. What other brands do you think are getting it right, either from like the way they, you know, present their products or market them commercially? Like who else is doing a good job?
I love Denison in this regard.
Yeah,
I think
it
they're
does.
doing
That's great.
such a fantastic job. Obviously, Emmanuel is a beautiful, beautiful designer in that respect and has put his wonderful design touch on all of these pieces, but they don't talk about it from a gender perspective. Like, the first
Yeah.
piece they came out with their iconic cushion case was so suitable for so many wrists, and then at dual time, slightly wider versus longer. Again, really suitable for wrists. And now their ALD Mini is such a special piece. I have a double stacked one that I'm obsessed with, but I think they do a good job because they don't talk about it from a gender perspective whatsoever. They're like, this is what we're bringing out. It's very design forward. It's very fun. It's very much about showing off your personal style. So I think them as an example are doing a very good job. I don't want to be mean and list you the brands that aren't. There's obviously a fair few that are
Yeah.
really catering towards one specific demographic. But I do see Denison in particular and a lot of the indies doing that.
Hmm.
Mhm.
What's his name? Incredible triangle, that Anoma. I was like, what's the
Yes.
wonderful shape? Again,
Yep.
incredible job of genderless watches more broadly, just putting out a watch. The same with Mr. Enthusiast. I'm losing
Yes.
everyone's name today.
Yeah.
Toledano.
Phil Toledano.
Toledano
Yeah.
and Chan. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they also heard from their audience that it's too big. Like, the first piece that
Mm.
they came out, incredible ruthless design, just too big on smaller wrists. Not, oh,
Yeah.
we need to make this suitable for women. More so, we need to make this smaller to fit all sorts of wrists. And so they've been able to do that with their new gold dial piece. So I think a lot of indies are able to be more agile, more flexible just because they are independent. So if larger brands can follow suit from the rise of the indie sort of mania, which is incredible, like,
Yeah.
we get spoiled with all of these innovative designs. I'm hoping that they can then influence what we're doing at the larger sort of regional LVMH level.
For sure. I
Yeah.
mean, that would be a cool development if the larger brand, the conglomerate owned brands start following the indies lead. I mean, we're certainly all for that here. The common thread between, you know, Anoma and Toledano and Chan is, you know, Phil and Mateo at Anoma are both like they both come from like a vintage watch
Yeah.
background. And like that's, you know, to like kind of like bring things full circle is like kind of, you know, how these things all tie together is sort of like a, you know, there was a, I don't know, like that vintage sizing just sort of is like it's just fundamentally appealing, I think, you know,
Mhm.
to you know, to a lot of people, and we're kind of like rediscovering that, which is an
Yeah.
exciting thing. Yeah. Um, Georgia, what's next? So you've been doing the watch thing for 5 years or so. What, you know, I don't want to ask you to like make too many predictions about the next 5 years, but like how do you see this kind of like taking shape? Like I think often about like how the media landscape itself has just like changed. There was a period of time where watch blogs were transgressive and like the new kids on the block and like didn't get the respect from print media, and now there's like a similar dynamic between watch blogs and Instagram and TikTok creators, and there will be a time when Instagram and TikTok feel old fashioned. So like how do you prepare for that, and where do you see sort of like the media landscape like resting if it ever does at any point?
That's a really good question. And in terms of preparing, I don't know if you can prepare. I think what you have to do is just constantly be on your toes, constantly think of sort of new ways that you're going to engage with an audience and sort of keep people excited. I think because of the plethora of media that we get spoiled with, our attention to anything is just depleted. We want to see Instagram say they want to hook after 3 seconds. They don't. It needs to be half a second in order for you to actually stop and scroll, which is wild. So whether it's traditional media, whether it's print magazines, whether it's Instagram Reel or TikTok, it just needs to be engaging and sort of captivating to a user in a way that they perhaps haven't seen before. And I do think with the rise of AI specifically, people are moving back to analog. Like, can they touch magazines again? Can they have zines and limited edition pieces? I think the guys at High Stout make these novelty, tiny little magazines that just engage with an audience in a way that people haven't seen before. So I think that rise of sort of kind of novelty element and that nostalgia sort of nod in terms of media and the way that we actually portray these new pieces is going to be just very much is going to be needed from us to do that. So I think we have to stay agile, we have to stay flexible, and we have to stay sort of true to our own voices. Something that I feel very lucky that I'm tapping into more so is sort of the collision of design and my love of watches. So I am working with a couple brands on various different design projects. And for me, in growing in that space is just like my dream come true. Like I can talk about these things that I'm obsessed with, and I can couple that with my actual design background and work on projects in that capacity. Like to me, that's an actual dream, and I'm so grateful that I get to do that. But I think just sharing joy, sharing what resonates with you, being authentic as you can, and I think people are just going to want to follow and want to listen in that, and that scales across all media. So we don't want to hear just copy paste, here's a spec sheet. We want to be like, why is this great? Why is this bad? Why do you maybe want it? And people will really resonate with that.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
It's heartening to hear you say that people are you also see that people are still interested in like the tactile thing, like the physical thing, the magazines, the books. I think I agree. I think that there is like a hunger for that, and I mean that's refreshing that like we haven't completely lost touch with the analog and with like holding something in your hand, because that's really what like watch enthusiasm is all about. Like it's a hard thing to to appreciate from afar, and like we always talk about how like you don't necessarily need to like own a watch to appreciate it, but like they are tactile objects, and like you do wear them, and ultimately like it's a physical thing that like you need to have some experience with to like fully appreciate. Can you talk a little bit about the Maurice Lacroix collaboration, or the project that you're working on? Oh, you're holding up. Yeah.
Just happens to be in my hands.
Just so happens to be.
Just so happens to be.
Yeah.
This was, I'd gladly talk about this. This was an extremely exciting design project. So Marcia at Maurice Lacroix tapped into a couple of collectors in the space, in the community, and said that they wanted to work on a collaboration watch together. And I'd never been more excited in my life. And obviously it was to do with America's 250th birthday, which I thought as a Brit being involved in this project is even more exciting. But it was so fun to get to work on that. And often design by committee can be very, very difficult. But we worked with such amazing people who all brought really, really unique lenses to the project. So we really wanted to introduce those Easter eggs into the design. How can we do a nod to America without it being too red, white, and blue? And what can we do that's really going to still resonate with both the collector community as well as the Maurice Lacroix customer? So this is the gorgeous piece. It's probably easier to put a photo over the video instead. But
we'll find one, yeah.
We'll find one. Something that I love about this is the actual lume markers. And when it glows, you could probably see it glows like the crown of the Statue of Liberty. So we're really using the existing sort of infrastructure of the watch itself, but just tweaking it slightly so that it's still a recognizable icon piece from Maurice Lacroix, but it has this incredible glow to match the crown. And I think that, and there's probably about 7 or 8 different Easter eggs throughout the whole thing, including sort of stars on the back and printed with like a happy birthday America, all sorts on it. But getting to work on this was an absolute dream come true. It arrived on the 3rd, and I was like, what is this box with all these labels and stickers? I just didn't know it was going to arrive on time. And I feel so special that I have my name involved in this project. So I feel really
cool.
lucky for that.
Very cool. Very cool. Congratulations on the on the launch of that project. And it's nice to hear that you have some others in the other projects in the fire, which is exciting. I don't know if you can share anything about those, but in any case, you'll have to come back or at least let us know.
I will. I'll do an unveiling when I'm allowed to, but definitely Studio Underdog will for Adobe we'll do an unveil for that. But I'm working on some other illustration projects with some other brands as well, which will be really fun. So when those come to life or when those come out, I'll let you guys know.
Wonderful.
Exciting.
Wonderful. Georgia, I can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your day to chat with us. You're one of those people I always appreciate running into at like the various watch events. It's always so fun to talk to you, and it's really great to get you on the podcast finally to talk about this this part of the community, which is growing and so important. So thank you for coming on.
I have to shout out and apologize because I think the last time we saw each other, I was 7 days out of Watches and Wonders. We bumped into each other at the airport in London, and my brain was fried. I was like, I could not even put a sentence together. So I'm sorry. I don't even remember what I said. I remember I saw you.
Don't worry at all.
Apologies if I was a zombie.
Not on the slightest. I was delighted to see you. I was felt like I'd seen a celebrity in the airport. It was so exciting. No. I love getting to see all of you at all the various events all across the world. How do we get to see each other all in these amazing places? It's amazing. But
it's fun.
Thank you so much for having me on today as well. It was a delight to chat with both of you. And
for sure.
I'm excited for what's next. Yeah.
Of course. We always close out the show with some cultural recommendations. These are just recommendations about the things we like, things we've come across, things that we've consumed or heard about or in culture, not necessarily watch related, but Georgia, I've asked you to come prepared with a cultural rec. What have you got for us?
So New York has just opened at the International Center of Photography an exhibition on Yves Saint Laurent and talking about their history and their incredible brand and their sort of life that they created. And it's on, I think, for a couple months more, but it opened about last week. I haven't been yet, and I'm so excited to go.
Sounds great. Awesome. We'll definitely leave a link for that in the show notes. Thank you for that recommendation. Kat, what have you got?
I have a couple. I'm afraid we might have an overlap on one. So
that's okay.
All right. Well, I'm gonna say this is everyone's probably already seen this, but the last season of The Bear. I was a bit hesitant to watch it because the last season I was like, it was okay. I was amazed with this final season and watched the final episode yesterday and cried like a baby watching it. And they ended perfectly. There's also a lot of watch references.
A lot of watch season. Content.
Yeah, which is fun. But if you're on the fence about it, finish it. It's amazing. It's great.
Yeah, no, The Bear's good. I was a little. The last few seasons have been kind of hit or miss for me, but they landed the plane, as they say. I enjoyed the final season. That's a good rec. I had The Bear on my list. I was going to mention it if you didn't. So I will recommend a movie that I saw over the weekend, which I posted about on Instagram, and a lot of people were like, "Really? Is this actually good?" I saw the new Jackass movie over the weekend, which is frankly the hardest I've laughed in a movie theater in a very long time. It's hysterical, and it's apparently it's the last Jackass movie. They've done several, and of course the show on MTV is now 25 years old or something.
Wow.
And if you've watched these idiots hitting each other in the groin for multiple decades, there's something kind of profound about watching them do it for the last time and as they approach 50. And it's that's crazy. It's really as someone who is, I'm going to be 44 years old this year. And it's affecting. I'll just say that. And a lot of the stunts and gags are kind of built around aging and recognizing your mortality and then how the years pass. So and it's also just hilarious. So Jackass best and last.
Yeah, there's been a lot of I think nostalgic movies and shows this year with Scary Movie coming back out. I think they're really speaking to us millennials a little bit.
They're the 90s, if you can remember the 90s.
Is punk's gonna come back at this point? Can we even can you punk people anymore?
Can you sign this waiver first, please, before we punk you?
It all comes back.
Yeah.
Kat, Georgia, thank you again.
Well, thanks, Zach.
For coming on the pod. Really, really fun conversation. We appreciate it. And thank you to everyone listening for coming back for another week of the Waterwound podcast. We will be back again next week with another all new episode. Until then, take care.